Hockey games, they date back to the very beginning of home gaming. If your first generation console didn't carry an off-brand Pong game with 2 paddles per player, you demanded your money back. 2 paddles, a small gap in each side of the screen, and all the same mechanics of regular Pong? Well, that's all you needed to play hockey on your TV back at the dawn of gaming. The Magnavox Odyssey started this trend, and everyone who came after copied that model. If you were a hockey fan in the late 70s and you didn't want to go outside, this is how you played hockey at home. Nowadays, it's hard to come back to games this simple, but it's not impossible. If you have the patience to get yourself used to the old style of early analog sticks, it's still possible to enjoy a game of hockey on a first-generation console, even here in the 21st century. But that's only the beginning. 2 blocks smacking another block between gaps in other blocks, that can only get you so far. So, come along with me in this first part of a 2-part series where we're going to be looking at the history of hockey, computer and video games. So grab your hockey hats, hockey fans, and let's get to it. Nhl Hockey on the Intellivision is the first licensed NHL hockey game, although you wouldn't know that if you're in most markets, since it was also released as just plain hockey. And to be fair, that's not a bad renaming choice, since if you read out the original name in full, it's National Hockey League Hockey, which is a bit of a mouthful, and it just sounds a bit silly. So, since it's also a year before the Atari 2600's ice hockey game, I think we'll start our review by grabbing our ridiculous, look at the shape of this, is this a phone or what? We'll grab our ridiculous Intellivision controllers and get a look, taking a look at the first 16-bit hockey game. Wow, that's 16-bit? Yeah, take a look. That's the awesome power of the Intellivision. Now the first thing you'll notice with this game is that it's 2-player only. That doesn't mean you can't give it a try and see how it feels, of course. It just means that we can't get the full benefit of the game without dragging in some other poor bugger to play this with me, and let's face it, that's not happening. So the controls are surprisingly heavy, but for a game that's played on ice, there is a decent amount of momentum, which means that your character will continue to slide in the direction that you were moving if you take your finger off the direction control, which is good. But the strangest thing is, the character feels like they're gliding along treacle, not ice. They're so heavy that getting moving feels far too slow to be realistic. You get 2 options for hitting the puck. Pass, which is a low-powered hit, and shot, which is a high-powered hit. You'll need to use both to maintain proper control over the puck. The character will hit the puck in whichever direction you're aiming when you press the button. And I do mean whichever way you're aiming. This is an 8-way control game. So watch out for accidentally doing a diagonal shot. And you will, because this is the controller and it's so easy to accidentally press the wrong place. But it's almost impossible to score a goal, so maybe that doesn't really matter. The goalie is not player controlled. It's the Intellivision that's running this guy for both teams. So if you thought you could get a quick high-scoring game going by just playing the one player on a 2-player game, no, you're wrong. And I do mean the goalie is impossible to get past. I played for 15 minutes with no opponent and I couldn't score once. He'll save against anything, which ruins the game for me. If you can't use strategy to knock a goal in even with a rebound off the post, what's the point in playing? Thankfully, there was another Intellivision hockey game, and it's single player as well, which is great. It's an update to the NHL hockey game, and it fixes some of the bugs. But it also turns the rink into a rectangle instead of a rounded-edged rink, which is just stupid because it was rounded-edged in the original, and rinks are supposed to be rounded-edged, so why take one step forward and then one step back? It just doesn't make sense. Anyway, let's have a look at it. This is Slapshot, Super Pro Hockey, and it's the superior game by far. The heavy controls are still here, which is unfortunate, but the AI has been tweaked to make it possible to actually score a goal, although you will still need a fair amount of skill to do it, so that's actually pretty good. It's a good challenge. Even on the lowest difficulty settings, this is a challenge. and being able to play this one player means we can actually enjoy a decent game this time around. There are fouls and power plays. The goalies and the other players can be knocked over. So if you're not very good at the game, knocking the goalie over means that you've got a much better chance of actually scoring. And all in all, this is a very fun game. Even compared to the modern hockey games, this one still holds its own for the most part, and I had a lot of fun playing it. But we can't just sit here all day playing Intellivision, can we? Atari wants its try as well, so let's move over to the 2600 era and try out some ice hockey Atari style. Ice hockey came to us via Activision, who were the gamer's publishers of choice back in the 2600 era because they produced some spectacular stuff. When they brought us this game in 1981, they backed it up with the most ludicrous advert you can imagine.
Think you're ready for it? One of the roughest video games around?
So apparently this is the most roughest, intense game of hockey around. It's like a battle in sports form with some very colourful characters and lots of action. Shall we see for ourselves? Yeah, this is pretty much what I expected from a hockey game on the Atari 2600. The controls, they're really smooth. They respond far better than they did on the Intellivision, but the number of players on screen is severely reduced. We're also playing vertically now rather than horizontally, which means that the playable area feels far smaller than it did on the Intellivision. Whether that's a good or bad thing is up to you and how you prefer to play, but for me it feels a little bit cramped. The goalkeeper now is player controlled, which means that you're far more likely to actually score a goal. That's both a good thing and a bad thing. It's actually nice to score a goal in a game where that is the aim of the game after all, but it also means that you do have to constantly keep your eye on where your goalie is, because if the computer scores, well, that's on you. Despite its flaws though, this is a really good hockey game on the 2600 and I had a lot of fun playing it. There are some nice tactical options with it, since you can use one player to lure the opponent's player out of the way of your other player, then pass the puck to score a goal. That's nice. The problem is, the game feels a little bit cramped, and the lack of players on screen also makes it feel very empty at the same time. It's a weird dichotomy, but there it is. Nevertheless, I actually had a lot of fun while playing this game. It's not a game that, I admit, it's not a game that I will come back to all the time, but if I got my Activision Anthology disc out on the PS2, I'd probably boot this up after I've played a quick round or two of whatever I'd actually gone in to play. Which, to be fair, is how a lot of us played Atari back in the day, so there's nothing wrong with that. But let's jump ahead a few years, shall we? Because across the ocean from where Atari and Intellivision were mainly duking out for their main rounds, we had our own set of computers with our own set of hockey games. So here on the UK side was the Amstrad, the Spectrum, and even the American Commodore 64. And they brought hockey in a different way. So let's take a look at what they had to offer. With the ZX Spectrum dominating the home computer era in the UK, it's a wonder that there weren't more hockey games produced for it. I spent quite a while looking around, and it turns out that while several were planned, most never actually saw release. As a result, we only have one hockey game to show you on the Spectrum, and it's a compilation called Winter Sports. This is a compilation set of winter-based, or at least cold-themed games, one of which is ice hockey. And I'm sorry to say, this is probably the worst hockey game that I have ever played. It's slow, it's jerky, the players get stuck on one another because collision detection is broken, and there's next to no sound. It's possible to lead the opponent's goalie out of the way so that you can score an open goal, and that's probably the best thing I can say about this game. It's not good. The game also came out on the Amstrad CPC, and it's pretty much a straight specky port. Now, anyone who knows the CPC knows what a specky port is. It's usually a sign that the game was dumped directly from the RAM of a ZX Spectrum into the RAM of the Amstrad CPC, and then tweaked a little bit to get the game to actually run. Since both machines used the Z80 processor, that was a quick and dirty way of getting a game onto the Amstrad without having to code more for the system. Amstrad, of course, being the third player in a three-horse race, so the amount of money for development time of a game for the CPC was severely reduced because you wouldn't get as much back from publishing a game on that system. So you reduced your expenses to maximise your profit. It's not great, but that's what happened. And as a result of this min-maxing for profit, we tended to get a lot of low-colour, slow and jerky games because the CPC would essentially be pulling double duty having to cope with code that wasn't optimised for it. And that's exactly how playing this version of the game feels. It's even slower and more jerky than the ZX Spectrum version was, which is not a good thing. So you know what? Avoid it. Just avoid both versions of this game. You can do better than this. Speaking of doing better, here's Slapshot for the Amstrad CPC. I used to play this game all the time when I was a kid. I've been a big fan of ice hockey since my early teenage years, and this was my go-to ice hockey game until I moved on from the CPC to the Mega PC. Slapshot may share a name with the Intellivision game that we played earlier, but the similarities, they end there. This is a great game with great graphics, but really weird controls, and I do mean weird. There are 9 keys that you have to use to control your player, one for each of the compass directions, plus a fire button, which is right in the middle, and it's very annoying that it's there. There's no joystick support, you have to use the keyboard, and if you want to play 2-player, that means one of you is on one side of the keyboard, and the other is on the other side. It's very strange, and it kind of works, but you have to get used to it. The fire button is clustered into the middle of your 9-key control set, like I mentioned earlier, and it makes working out the best way to control this mess quite a hassle. But once you get the hang of it, the game is a lot of fun to play. To make it a little easier on those of you who are struggling to control your players, you don't have to worry about your goalie. Both teams' goalies just float up and down the screen patrolling their goals. That's all they do. Scoring is therefore a matter of timing. Oh, did I say goals? Yeah, they're not. In this game, they're called goals. G-O-L. Goals. Yeah. They misspelled a 4-letter word, which just happens to be the aim of the game. I'm not kidding here. There's a spelling mistake in the game in a 4-letter word. Goal became a running joke amongst my friends and I. Whenever someone scored a goal, we would shout, "Goal!" Yeah, we were easily pleased. You had to make your own fun back then. Anyway, Slapshot on the Amstrad CPC is a superb game. It was my go-to hockey game of choice back when the CPC was my main computer, and it only got overtaken once I discovered the joys of NHLPA hockey on the Mega Drive, which we'll get to later. Slapshot never came out on the ZX Spectrum. There was a version planned, but it never came out, which is a real shame when you think about it, because I would have loved to have seen how people would have managed to get 2 players onto that tiny rubber keyboard for the Spectrum. That would have been so funny. But alas, it was not to be. However, the Commodore 64 did get a version, and we're going to take a look at it right now. So, how did the world's most popular 8-bit computer fare on the hockey front? Well, it's in this version of Slapshot that we see a lot of similarities to the Intellivision game from earlier. They were released around the same time. You've got to remember the Commodore 64 was out at the time that the Intellivision was also on the shelves. And although the 2 games are separate productions, as far as I can tell, the game does look a lot more on the Commodore 64 version like the Intellivision version than the CPC one, even down to the monochrome characters. And the game plays an awful lot more like the Intellivision version did as well. It's even 2-player only, which doesn't make for the most riveting experience when you're playing on your own. Now I realise there are only so many ways that a game of hockey can be rendered on a computer or a console. It just seems weird to me though that 2 games called Slapshot should look so similar and play so similarly despite being completely different games that just happen to be called Slapshot. Anyway, thank goodness that there's a sequel that improves on this game in every way. This version has a 1-player option, and it's damn hard too. Even on the lowest difficulty setting, you will be getting quite a challenge, which is great because it keeps you coming back. The speech is also very nicely done, and the gameplay is a lot of fun, although it's worth noting that it seems to be joystick only, at least for the 1-player mode. So if you don't have a joystick, you're out of luck with this one. Out of the 2 Slapshot games on the C64, I have to recommend the sequel. It's better in every single way, and you'll have a lot of fun with it. Now, I'll grant you, the graphics on this version aren't as good as on the CPC, which is, you know, just one of those things. But it's a challenging game that plays very nicely, and I really have enjoyed it. But there is one thing that you'll probably be asking yourself. You'll be wondering why so many games are called Slapshot. Why on earth would it be? All of these hockey games have the same title. Well, the fact is, you can't copyright the term Slapshot. it's a hockey term. It means to hit the puck really hard with a shot that makes a slapping sound because of the strength of the shot. So it's a term that hockey players and hockey fans will all know, but you can't put it as one particular game because it's just a generic term. It's kind of one of those things. It differentiates ice hockey from other kinds of hockey in the same way that calling an NFL game touchdown would separate it from any other form of football instead of just calling the game football. It's one of those things. That's why you get so many of them. Anyway, we've had a look at the 8-bit home computer range, and some of the games have been pretty good. But let's go back to the consoles, because once the home computers had their time a little bit, the consoles started to come back in, didn't they? With the Sega Master System in particular here in Europe, managing to take a bite out of the market. So, let's go back to the consoles and see what Sega has to offer. And I bet you won't be able to guess what they called their game. Sega's Slapshot has all the typical Sega flair that you've come to know and love. There are cutscenes when someone scores a goal. There's an interesting fight mechanic which took me a little more time to get the hang of than I'd care to admit. And there's plenty of colour with well-defined graphics. It's a decent 8-bit hockey simulation. Admittedly, it's not that much of a step up from the home computer versions once you get into the game itself, aside from the cutscenes and the Sega polish, but you do get to choose your teams, and the controls are very responsive for the era, so all in all, it's a decent game. But hockey didn't stop on the 8-bit consoles, did it? Now, as I've indicated before, I had a lot of fun with the Intellivision, even with the weird PC series from the 70s, that would be the PC50X series, but hockey didn't stop there, of course it didn't. You wouldn't stop on 8-bit systems, would you? As we already saw with the Intellivision, a 16-bit system could definitely run a game of hockey. So I think it's time that we introduced what became my go-to hockey game, and which solidified my love of hockey. Let's take a look at NHLPA 93, on the Mega Drive. I'm going to come out and say this right from the start. This is the pinnacle of the ice hockey console games up to this point. It's the one that I played so often as a child. If you play this, you don't need to play any other hockey game on the Mega Drive. It's arcade action, crossed with simulation, and it has all the flair, all the polish, all the gameplay tweaks from every game that we've seen so far. It's basically the best hockey game that I ever played in my youth, and it kicks arse so hard that the arse will fly around the world and come back for seconds. I still come back to NHLPA 93 even today. I never had a copy as a kid, I'll admit that straight off, because my friend had a copy and we all used to go round to his house so that we'd play a tournament. But when I left university and started getting back into retro games, I did source a copy from eBay that I've still got right now. It's still as good now as it was back when I first started playing it at 13, when I was playing it for the first time. Nowadays, I am able to see the lack of fluid animation and the fact that you don't turn quite as quickly as you'd like, but when you're playing it, none of that matters. It's an absolute gem, and you need to give it a try. Oh, and in case you're wondering, yes, this is where my love of the St. Louis Blues first started. I was playing a season of NHLPA 93 with my friends, and naturally, we had to all pick a team, because that's what you do in a season. I chose the Blues, and I can't actually remember why, but I think it was because their logo looks pretty damn cool. But by the time the season was over when we were playing, I knew that it was my team for life. It's just funny how things work out like that, isn't it? Now, normally this is where I would jump to the next era of gaming and bring in a PS1 title to show you what comes next. But I'm not going to do that this time. I've saved the CD and DVD sections of this for part 2 of this video series. There's 2 parts. So that I can talk to you all about home computing and cartridge gaming in this particular episode. So what have we got left? Well, we have one more cartridge console to cover in this outing. And you might say, I've saved the best for last. I have 2 hockey games on the N64 to show you. There are more. There are more on every console that I've shown you. But I can only cover the ones that I have available to me. So, let's start our 64-bit adventure with a game that takes a very different look at hockey to what we've seen so far. This is Wayne Gretzky's 3D Hockey. Wayne Gretzky on the N64 is more like an arcade game than a hockey game. In many ways, it's the NBA Jam of hockey, complete with goals bursting into flames when a particularly souped-up player scores. Goal! The puck has a speed line behind it. When you shoot it, the players all move like they have a rocket on their back, and the game is far more fast-paced than you are likely to ever be used to. It's an intense game, and I can't help but love it. It's fast, it's super smooth, it's amazing fun, and it's just great to play. Wayne Gretzky's 3D Hockey is the game that you put on when you have friends round and you all want to play something that's incredible fun. This isn't a simulation of ice hockey so much as it's a simulation of the spirit of ice hockey. Give it a try. Even if you're not the biggest hockey fan, I think you'll enjoy it. But for those of you who want something that's more like the simulationist, arcade simulationist at least, version of hockey that we've all come to know and love, I have saved the last one for you. This is NHL 99 on the Nintendo 64. I have to admit, I did not expect this to be as good as it is. I'll be honest with you right up front. The NHL series can be a little hit and miss, depending on which year's offering you're playing. Every year they tweak things. A little change here, a little change there, just to see what will work and what won't. As a result, if you like the game one year, you may not enjoy it quite as much the year after. But the year after that, it could be great. It's a weird way of making games, but they do seem to make it work. In the case of NHL 99 on the N64, the balance between arcade action and simulation is almost perfect. So it all comes out good. This is very much like the NHLPA 93 of the Mega Drive, only enhanced to boost it past the next level. It's smooth, it's responsive, it feels like you're not only watching a hockey game, you're really part of that hockey game. If I'd had this back in the day, I'd have stuck with it for the long haul. I'll freely admit that, because once you've played this, you don't need any other hockey game for your console. This could be the one that you play with your friends round if for some reason they're not into Wayne Gretzky and the fun and wackiness that comes from that, but it's also the one that you'd put in and play when you're on your own and you want to really take your team all the way this season. It's great. Hockey has come a long way since the early days of bat and ball basic Pong clones. We've gone from abstract designs and stickmen right the way through to being as close to a real game of hockey as you could get with the technology that was available. It's been a great ride, and I'm eager to see what comes next. So I hope you'll join me next time when we see what the next iteration of gaming can be when CD-ROM and DVD start to enter the fray. I'll see you then. If you like the show, please consider supporting me on Patreon. It really does help create future videos. That's patreon.com/Zoe Kirk Robinson. And I've got an extra special thanks going out to Chief89, Sam Yates, Retro Mickey 82, Mo Henry, and George Botterini. Thank you so much, guys.